Hello, you absolute legends. 6 years ago, I released a video titled, "This Quake record took 17 years to beat." In that video, we explored the full world record history of Quake's very first level, E1M1. We learned about all of the amazing discoveries and advances in techniques that culminated in the runner Jukebox achieving a time of 19 seconds in September of 2019. This was inarguably one of the greatest Quake speedruns of all time, and commenting on the run, I had this to say. For all intents and purposes, this is as low as the record can go. Barring some major strategy development, the record is going to remain 19 for a long, long time. At the time, it really did seem as though a 19-second run was the best a human could achieve, and by 2019, I would definitely consider this time period to be part of the modern era of speedrunning, where truly max times for individual level speedruns were beginning to become more and more common. In 2017, we saw 52 seconds achieved on DAM for GoldenEye 007. 2019 saw 8 seconds on E1M1 for Doom and 19 seconds for Quake, and last year we saw 4 seconds on level 1 for Doom 2. All first level runs on the most classic 90s first-person shooters, and all considered to be the human max when achieved. The last decade or so has seen these games truly pushed to their limits, and yet here we are, the end of 2025, and the speedrunner Kisimov has just achieved a run of 18 seconds for the first level of Quake, breaking Jukebox's record by a full second. 6 years ago, this would have seemed almost unfathomable, but a combination of inhuman skill and a rather large breakthrough in the strategy used has shaved off just enough time to beat yet another second barrier. In today's video, we will take a look at the new world record for Quake's E1M1 and the incredible optimization that made it all possible. I really hope you enjoy. Guys, I'm 39 years old. For 15 years of my life, I worked a job I hated, earning below average salary, and it sucked. Honestly, without YouTube, I would be screwed. All because I never learned any skills. Don't be like me. Learn a skill, build a good career that earns decent money, and do it as soon as possible. My advice, learn to program. And the best way to learn to program is with today's sponsor, Boot.dev. Boot.dev is the best because it makes learning to program as interesting and engaging as it can possibly be. Boot.dev turns learning to program into a game, where you earn XP, gain levels, and complete quests. Right now, the most popular programming language in the world is Python, so it's the perfect place to start. But there are tons of courses covering a bunch of different languages. Boot.dev also comes with your own personal tutor named Boots. Boots is so nice and so patient, I couldn't imagine having a better teacher. So if you want a career in programming or just want to learn for fun, click my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen and use code KyleJobs for 25% off your entire first year on an annual plan. And of course, there is a 30-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee, so there really is no reason not to at least try it out. In this video, I'm not going to cover the entire history of E1M1 again, as I did that in my last video covering the stage. So if you do want a full historical breakdown, feel free to go and watch that video. 6 years ago, I think it was a great introduction to the history and techniques of Quake speedrunning. But nowadays, I'm going to assume that most of you now know the main mechanics at play. When Jukebox achieved a time of 19 seconds back in 2019, it was a really good run. And truthfully, it still holds up pretty well. I was correct when I said that without any major developments, the world record would likely remain at 19 seconds. Quake speedrunning requires a mastery of strafe jumping, the ability to gain and maintain speed by bunny hopping and air strafing, but strafe jumping does have its limits. Players are restrained in their movements simply due to the geometry of each level. We don't have the luxury of strafe jumping as if this were a 100-meter dash. Each map has a different layout, different obstacles, different enemy locations, and these variables raise the complexity dramatically. This isn't just about skill, though skill is obviously required. It's also about planning. Each jump is calculated in advance, and the entire run needs to be mapped out so that we can chain together as many bunny hops as possible without running into obstacles and losing our speed. And this is highlighted perfectly in the middle section of E1M1. The terrain ascends a total of 8 steps, and Ranger can only jump high enough to clear 2 steps at a time. So in theory, it should require a total of 4 jumps to reach the top. Trying to get up 3 stairs in a single jump is basically like running into a brick wall. However, there are obviously methods to gain extra height, like rocket jumps and damage boosts. And in E1M1, an explosive barrel at the very base of the stairs provides the perfect damage boost. The stair sequence begins with 3 steps, so without any extra assistance, we couldn't clear it in a single jump. But shooting the barrel while in midair and boosting ourselves provides just enough extra height to clear all 3. This is because the explosion always originates from the very bottom of the barrel, so as long as we are airborne, some of that boost will push us upwards. This leaves us with 5 more steps. So while it is great that we can get up 3 in one jump to begin the sequence, we still need to find a way to do that one more time to lower the total amount of jumps required. And without another barrel or some kind of explosive, this seems to be impossible. Ultimately, this creates a huge bottleneck. We need 3 jumps to reach the top, and we are going so fast and there is so little space to work with that not only do we need to slow down slightly, but we also need to take a wide line to reach the top without over jumping and hitting a step, causing us to stop dead in our tracks. The triple button section heading towards the end is also deceptively technical. After the 3rd button, runners need to do a near 180-degree turn, navigate around this obstacle on the right, and clear this railing to head into the final hallway. If your jump spacing causes you to overshoot the 3rd button, you'll end up landing on the downward slope just beyond. Landing on a downward slope is often a positive thing because some of your downwards momentum gets transferred into forwards momentum, increasing your speed. But as a trade-off, you get less height on your jump. So in this case, landing on the slope after the button does increase your speed, which should be good in theory. But because you get less height, it's almost impossible to clear this railing, and you end up either falling short or landing on the railing itself. Landing on the railing doesn't seem like a problem, but it actually ends up being suboptimal because just beyond the railing is another downward slope that ends up being more beneficial to use. This is because the slope is pointing directly where you need to go, and you're falling from a greater height, which results in more downward speed being transmuted to forward speed. Landing on the flat section at the button, on the other hand, allows you to jump higher, albeit slightly slower, which lets you clear the railing and land on the bottom slope, which gains more speed and allows you to maintain that extra speed throughout the entire final section of the level. So you can start to see how jumping too far or being too fast in one section may cause you to end up being slower in the long run. And this is the war that Quake speedrunners have been waging for decades. They are constantly trying to find the perfect combination of speed, lines, and jumps to milk as much from the level geometry as possible. This is why Jukebox's original 19 seemed to be as far as players could take E1M1. Sure, some sections could be slightly faster with better execution, but overall it's generally harder to go faster without sacrificing something later on. The jump pattern that Jukebox used was extremely difficult to improve. However, there was one relatively new technique that could be implemented that wasn't based around movement. Instead, it was an abuse of the game's frame rate at precise moments, a technique called the FPS trick. Abusing the frame rate to save time has been a staple of speedrunning for decades, and there is no better example than GoldenEye 007 for the Nintendo 64. The most common use of frame rate manipulation is to warp through doors slightly quicker, and the way we do this is by switching weapons. When the game is forced to render the new weapon, the frame rate is lowered dramatically for a split second. This drop in frame rate means that the distance covered by bond between 2 frames is greatly increased, and if the frame rate drops low enough, this distance can be large enough to completely bypass a door that would otherwise be preventing us from getting through. It's the reverse of the backwards long jump technique in Mario 64. In that case, players get more speed to increase the distance traveled between 2 frames. In GoldenEye, we keep the same speed, but lower the frame rate. It's 2 sides of the same coin. In Perfect Dark, we take it a step further, even setting the graphics to high res, which in any other circumstance would make the game unplayable due to how bad the frame rate is. Plus, we even equipped the X-ray scanner and switched weapons all at the same time to lower the frame rate so much that we can get through a tiny gap on the Pelagic 2 stage to skip half of the level. The harsh reality is that on the N64, you don't have the option to choose the frame rate. On the N64, the frame rate chooses you. So we have to get creative and lower or raise the frame rate to suit our needs with whatever tools we have available within the game, whether that be by switching weapons or changing settings, or by looking directly at the floor for the entirety of a speedrun. Quake, on the other hand, is different, because with Quake, players can just choose their frame rate at will. In Quake, using the options, you can literally change the frame rate to either 10 FPS or 100 FPS at the press of a button. Which is why, in my opinion, it's kind of peculiar that a lot of the FPS manipulation tricks that players now use in Quake are relatively new. For example, on the stage E3M2, there is an invisible trigger that lowers a key when we pass through it. Historically, players have used a grenade jump or a damage boost from an enemy to clear over the trigger. But in 2020, Jukebox just jumped straight through it by lowering the frame rate to 10. With enough speed and a low frame rate, you can clear the trigger completely in a single frame, just like Mario in Super Mario 64 getting through a door. It's also exactly like the tile warp I talked about in my Egypt video a few months ago, though again in that case, we skip the trigger by switching weapons and causing a brief drop in FPS. In Quake, Jukebox literally just pressed a button to briefly get the lowest frame rate you can have. Since that time, FPS manipulation has become a standard technique used on almost every level. The main use is right at the end portal. For each frame that is rendered, Quake will use Ranger's speed and direction to calculate where he will be on the very next frame. If, on any given frame, the game calculates that on the subsequent frame, Ranger will trigger the end portal, the level will end. The important point here is that the level ends on the frame before the portal is triggered, not on the frame it actually would be, which means that by lowering the frame rate, we can increase the distance from the portal that the level will end, because as you lower the frame rate, the distance traversed between frames becomes larger. And the in-game timer is only updated once per rendered frame. Given that the lowest frame rate the game will calculate physics at is 10, and one frame at 10 FPS is 0.1 seconds, this means that you can save almost a full tenth of a second by triggering the end portal earlier. The same applies for buttons and doors. If the game calculates that based on Ranger's speed and direction, a button would be triggered on the next frame, it will be activated on the current frame. When Jukebox achieved a time of 19 seconds on E1M1 in 2019, FPS tricks weren't used. And there are two places on E1M1 where this trick would be useful. Of course, we have the end portal, but we also have the button that activates the very first lift. So in total, we can save up to around 0.2 seconds if both FPS tricks were executed perfectly. In April 2023, the runner Raid Bell managed to get a time of 19.69 using FPS tricks, which also meant that he was around 0.1 seconds faster due to movement throughout the level, as Jukebox's original 19 was a 19.96. 19.69 is a really good run, essentially around the same pace as Jukebox, plus those extra tricks. And this was 4 years later. It was also around this time in April 2023 that the runner Kisimov also began to become proficient in the level, achieving a 19.8 himself. And Kisimov is what you would call a level specialist. Kisimov is the kind of player that will focus on a very small amount of levels trying to get a ridiculous run, rather than spread his play out over many levels trying to get as many new records as he can. And over the last 2 years, Kisimov would grind E1M1 more than anyone else in history, eventually achieving a 19.5 on November 1st, 2025. This run is incredible. Technically, it's only around a third of a second faster than Jukebox's original 19 without the tricks, but given how optimized the level already was, a third of a second is huge. Kisimov gained time by pushing the limits of what you can get away with. For example, pressing the button to activate the bridge loses speed due to friction, a necessary but costly action. Jukebox played this button rather safe, making sure the button was pressed, but Kisimov went full YOLO, just barely grazing the button the tiniest amount possible to still trigger it, inducing less friction, and therefore keeping more speed. It's far more precise, far more difficult, but slightly faster. 19.5 is where we are really getting into seemingly max territory. The run looks almost flawless. So in order to go from 19.5 all the way to 18, we really do need to start scavenging around the bottom of the barrel for any potential new strategies. And historically, these have usually been found in tool-assisted speedruns. In January of 2023, a tool-assisted speedrun on the easy difficulty was released by the TASer Jukespar, who managed to achieve a time of 17 seconds. Jukespar managed to solve the problem of the stair sequence in a very counterintuitive way. Everyone knows that bunny hopping is faster because when you run along the ground, friction causes you to lose speed. But you don't lose all of your speed instantly if you don't jump straight away. It's not as if you stop dead in your tracks if you don't jump. The amount of speed you lose is directly correlated with how many frames you remain on the ground, and the faster you are going to begin with, the longer it will take to reach your base running speed. And another important mechanic that we need to understand is that climbing a step while running doesn't actually cost any speed. You can see here that if I just run up the stair sequence, my speed doesn't change at all. So the specific action of climbing a step while running doesn't lose momentum. The only thing that would cost you speed if you were running would still be the simple mechanic of friction. So with that in mind, Jukespar realized that instead of trying to jump higher to clear an extra step, he could simply walk over it.
You can just walk over it. You are scum.
Yes, it's that simple. He just walked up one of the steps. Although it happened so quickly you couldn't even tell. That's because in order to do this properly and without losing too much speed, it's essentially frame perfect and also positionally perfect. In order for the task to get away with just walking up the step, it had to land perfectly in front of it so that at the same time that it landed, it began climbing. And then immediately after climbing, the ranger jumps. So in practice, the task was only on the ground for a very short period of time. Yes, of course, there is some speed loss from being on the ground for longer, but you end up saving an entire jump, so it's still far quicker. And because you already have so much speed from the barrel boost, if you cut down the jumping pattern to 3 jumps, you now even risk jumping too far and landing inside the pit. So some speed loss is still essentially necessary. And as an added bonus, with the ranger now positioned at the very top of the sequence, this also allows him to ignore the button completely, as from that position and with that speed, you can clear the pit without needing to extend the bridge, thus saving even more time. While all of this sounds good in theory, the strategy the TAS used appeared to be far too difficult for a human to replicate. To execute the barrel boost and achieve the exact speed, line, and position necessary to pull off a step glide and continue the run was considered humanly unviable. It just didn't seem possible to do such a demanding maneuver and intentionally land in the perfect position. And when I say perfect, I really do mean it. Later in 2023, Jukespar also released a tool-assisted run on the Nightmare difficulty, using a slightly different jumping pattern, but still using the same technique, this time climbing up the final step instead. However, again, the precision required to land perfectly in front of this step is ridiculous, which is why the step glide was brushed aside and relegated to a TAS-only strategy. But in 2025, a fun side project would unexpectedly breathe brand new life into the level. Back in 2021, Quake Enhanced was released, which was a full remaster of the original game. And as part of that remaster, Quake 64 was also included as extra downloadable content. Quake Done Quick projects have been a staple of Quake speedrunning since the 90s, where players would do segmented speedruns of the entire game to show off what's possible. But this kind of project had never been done with Quake 64. So a few years after the remaster was released, in July 2025, a Quake 64 full game segmented run started being worked on by the Quake speedrunning community. Quake 64 is very similar to the original Quake, but due to hardware restrictions on the N64, level designs were greatly simplified, and this becomes very important on E1M1. For example, in the original Quake, this large pole sits right here, but in Quake 64, the pole has been removed, which means there is a lot more space to move around, which, as I mentioned earlier in the video, is really important. Quake speedrunners are generally limited in what they can do based on obstacles and level geometry, so whenever you have more space or less obstacles, you have more potential for different lines and different jump patterns. What's also different is that when you shoot a barrel in the Quake 64 version, there is a delay before it explodes. This makes the barrel boost substantially easier, because now you don't have to do a crazy 180 spin mid-air in order to execute the boost. Now you can just shoot the barrel in advance and line yourself up much more easily before the boost occurs. So these two differences have a massive impact on how difficult this sequence is. We have more space, and the barrel boost is much easier to do. These changes led to the runner Chambers discovering that a step glide, which he knew was already a technique that could be used due to the tool-assisted speedrun, might now be humanly viable. And indeed, Chambers did find a way to implement the technique by changing the jump pattern. Chambers realized you could space your jumps to land just before this step here, and then jump again immediately after climbing. Again, you do lose some speed by remaining on the ground for an extra frame, but remember, with the previous strategy, players were already handicapping their speed to prevent themselves from jumping into the stairs. With this new jumping pattern, you could begin the sequence much faster, so in the long run, this didn't cost too much speed, and what you ended up saving is a full jump. The strategy is obviously still extremely precise, not just because you need to land in the perfect location, but also because the next step is so close. So if you do end up jumping a frame too late, you'll jump straight into the next stair. And this type of glide is not as easy as a standard bunny hop, because with bunny hopping, players always buffer the jump key, so that they jump as soon as they land. This makes the timing trivial. On the other hand, with a step glide, you can't do that. You need to land, glide up the step for one frame, and then press jump a frame or two later. So it's far harder for multiple reasons. However, with the extra space and easier barrel boost that the Quake 64 version provides, this trick is now feasible for a human to perform. With this new jumping sequence, you can get to the top of the stairs and land just before the edge of the pit in 3 jumps, and clear it without pressing the button. With Kisimov having the fastest E1M1 time of 19.5 seconds on the original version, he was already incredibly proficient at the level. And with the new strategy saving around half a second, the thought of an 18-second run was dangling in front of him like a carrot on a stick. Ultimately, Kisimov was already so good at the level that it didn't end up taking him long to attain a run of 18 seconds. Understandably, the first thought anyone might have is that the next logical step is to go for 18 seconds on the original game. But again, I can't stress enough that these are two completely separate beasts. Okay, so Kisimov can use the wide open terrain and a much easier barrel boost to get 18 seconds on Quake 64, but that doesn't mean much when he is faced with the reality of a giant pole now being right in the way in the original version, and needing to do a full mid-air 180 instant flick shot and instant 180 degree turn back again to continue the jumping pattern, all while attaining the perfect speed and landing in the perfect position right at the step, and then timing his next jump perfectly. When it comes to pure technique, this is arguably the hardest thing to do in any Quake speedrun currently performed. There really isn't anything quite like it. And without having the extra space and being able to go out nice and wide after the barrel boost, because you now have to cut inside the pole, players didn't even know if it were possible. Which is why when Chambers discovered this new route on Quake 64, he never even considered the possibility of it being used on the original. However, the fact remains, the prospect of 18 was too enticing to ignore, and Kisimov knew that he at least had to try. 18 seconds on E1M1 would be monumental, a record important enough to at least warrant some effort. Honestly, if he didn't at least try, he would be doing a disservice to Quake speedrunning. And to his surprise, with his already acquired mastery of the level, gained over years and years of practice, he could manage to hit the glide. Kisimov even found a brand new way to legitimately get enough height to clear an extra step in one jump. On one run, immediately after getting boosted by the barrel, he accidentally grazed against this lamp here. Because the lamppost is sloped upwards, brushing against it gave him slightly more height and allowed him to clear an extra step without needing to do a glide. Unfortunately, he choked the run in the final hallway, but the run itself was extremely fast, and if he did get 18 using this accidental discovery, that would have been pretty amazing. Ultimately, however, this strategy was not implemented into attempts, as it's even more precise and difficult than the step glide, and doesn't really save any significant time. Again, because if you jump too fast and too far, you'll just end up in the pit, so that particular bottleneck is always there. Kisimov really is a machine, and his years of grinding this one particular level immediately bore fruit. It really didn't take long before he was excruciatingly close to breaking the 19-second barrier. I guess Kisimov is just inhuman, because after only a couple dozen hours of grinding the new strategy, on the 22nd of November 2025, Kisimov would achieve this run. This run is obviously incredible, undoubtedly one of the best Quake speedruns of all time. While Kisimov was already a master of the level, the new step glide makes this run almost impossible to believe. And by the title of this video, you might think that this run is the greatest Quake speedrun of all time. But shockingly, while this new discovery and record is newsworthy and historic and amazing and one of the best speedruns ever, an even better speedrun just happened a few days ago. E1M1 on the easy difficulty is technically challenging, and Kisimov's run is technically extremely impressive. But what he went on to do on the Nightmare category is even more insane. And while his new agent record took a couple of days of grinding to achieve, his new Nightmare run took him months. In order to understand why Kisimov's Nightmare run is so incredible, we need to go back in time 6 years to when Jukebox achieved 19 seconds on easy. Let's briefly rewatch the stair section of Jukebox's 19-second run. It still looks incredible, and it still looks like a modern-day run. Now let's compare that to Jukebox's Nightmare record set 6 months later in 2020. You can immediately see the difference. Jukebox's Nightmare record in 2020 looks like an easy run from back in the late 90s. There are so many monsters that it's just impossible to string together a meaningful bunny hop sequence. It's just way too hectic. E1M1 on the Nightmare difficulty is one of the most RNG dependent runs in the entire game. And if I didn't give you any context and just showed you Jukebox's run from 2020, I really do think most people would think that run was decades old, just based on how technical and modern the easy run looks. It wasn't until 2024 that Kisimov finally made the Nightmare run look at least semi-modern with a run of 22 seconds. This time he put together a very nice looking jump pattern throughout the middle section of the run, even using power bunnies to jump the pit without activating the bridge. This record was already seen as incredible. To be able to get through the level this cleanly on Nightmare is mind-blowing. But on the 11th of December 2025, Kisimov would do something that seems impossible, and he would achieve this run. This run right here, a run of 21 seconds on Nightmare difficulty on E1M1, is probably the greatest Quake speedrun of all time. It doesn't seem like it would be on the surface because it just doesn't add any new crazy techniques. There is no amazing discovery, it just incorporates the barrel boost, which has been used on easy runs for over 2 decades. But it can't be overstated how insane it is to use this boost and not only survive to the end of the stage, but get through the gauntlet of monsters while maintaining such high speed. This run is basically a combination of doing something more difficult than anyone has ever done while winning the lottery. When you put them both together, it creates something magical. In the span of just 1 month, Kisimov has truly immortalized himself, not only in Quake's first level E1M1, but in Quake history in general. These records are now the pinnacle of Quake speedrunning. And it's honestly hard to comprehend how Quake speedrunners still to this very day continue to push boundaries almost 30 years after the game's release. A huge congrats to Kisimov on his recent records, thanks to the Quake speedrunners for chatting with me about the run, and also thanks to Connor from the YouTube channel Quake Speedruns Explained for providing some nice extra footage. If you love Quake speedrunning content, as I do cover many different games so I don't have the opportunity to cover a lot of Quake, definitely go and subscribe to his channel as he specializes in this classic game. Thank you so much for watching, you legends. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next video.